It's a very common task for computer programmers to be asked to do some calculations on data that's in a file. In fact, it's the norm. Normally, you wouldn't want to enter data manually into some kind of software package. You just have a big file with a lot of data points in it, and then you would want to do some sort of calculation. I always use the average as kind of a fiat or a placeholder for whatever type of calculation that you might want to do. And so that's what we're going to do in this next series of videos, is we're just going to open a file. Python is really good and really powerful, but there is a downside, I think, when you're first learning Python. And that is, if you had to Google how to open a file using Python, you're going to get a bunch of different answers, many different answers on how to do it. There are a lot of different ways to do it, and there are a lot of details about it that make it probably a little less straightforward than some other programming languages and things like MATLAB. So that's what we're going to do in these next few videos, is we're going to talk about all those nuances and details about opening files and doing things with the data inside a file. Okay, first thing we do is we go into the search bar and type CMD, and we get the command prompt. And then I'm going to get in the right directory. In this case, I go CD OneDrive, CD Desktop, CD Python code. Then we made the batch file that's going to make a project for us. So I'm going to use make project, and then I'm going to call this one file 1, right? Then I go into the file manager, and I look and I see that file1.py is in the folder there. I need to do one thing before I move on, is I need a data file. Well, so you have the data file directory that I gave you, and in there is a bunch of different different data files with different sizes. So I'm going to pick the smallest one, 010. So I'm just going to take 010 from that and just put it in there, and that's going to be the one I'm going to calculate the average of. That's the data I'm going to calculate the average of 10 numbers. Okay? Good. All right. So that's we're ready to go, and so I double click on file1.py, and it comes up in Notepad++, and I'm ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to include mean, because I want to calculate the average value. So from statistics, import mean. I'm doing that. The next command is to get a handle to the file that we're interested in. And so for that, we use the command open. So fp equals open, and then 010 is the file name, and then the second input argument to open is how do you want to open the file. And I want to open it as a read file. R stands for read, W stands for write, and there's a bunch of others, append, things like that. So I just want to read the data from a file. So that's what that line does. Then, now that it's open, I want to read the data. And so this is where Python is different from a lot of linear programs. If you're familiar with MATLAB and C, you're going to wonder what that dot means. And so FP now is something bigger than just a variable. It has things associated with it. The dot read, it's a method. It's a method for the object FP. So FP is a handle to a file, and read is something you can do to that type of variable, that type of thing, FP. It's new, right? So that's a new feature that's common on Python, and it's sort of the dawn of understanding true object-oriented programming. And so you'll just have an object that has methods associated with it. That's just a common feature of object-oriented programming. So, and then I want to put that into a variable data. So data equals fp read. Read what's inside the file. That's pretty obvious what it does, all right? Then you always have to close files at the end. That's kind of a housekeeping thing. So fp.close is closing the file. So now the file's closed. We open the file, we read the data, we close the file. Okay. So that's it. That looks pretty easy. That's not too hard. But there's a catch. Let's print the data out. We see it looks like a column of data. Everything looks fine. If you look at it if you run it, Python 3, file1.py, and it prints the data, up comes data. I'm not going to do it yet. I'm not going to take the average of data yet, mean. I'm not going to use the average as mean of data or something like that. I'm not going to do that just yet, because I'm not sure what type of data I'm looking at. Okay? So the next thing I want to do is I want to print out what kind of data is it. What is that thing that I just printed out? And so you can print the type of data that it is. So when I'm going to talk about what that means, when we see what the results are. So I'm going to add that line, print type parentheses data, right? So print parentheses type parentheses data. So what type of data are we looking at? It comes back str. That means string. fp.read returns a string. A string. It's a single string of all the characters in that file. This is sort of a thing about what type of data there is. There are numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 3.14159 is also a number. So there's integers and floating point numbers. Those are different kinds of variables in programming. But there are also characters. And so the character 0 is not the same thing as the number 0. The number 0 has a mathematical value. The character 0 is just the thing on the top right part of your keyboard. Click. You just press a key and it's a character 0. It doesn't have any mathematical representation. It's just one of all the characters on your keyboard for your laptop. Does that make sense? Yeah. So characters are different than numbers, right? And so a string is just a big long string of characters. It's just a character string. So that's all we're printing out. We're just printing out all the characters. You can convert characters and strings into numbers. There's ways to do that. We just have to learn how to do that. So that's what we have to do. To sort of punch the point home, when I take the average of data, in this case, it freaks out. So if I add to the program, average equals mean data, it gives me a zillion errors. It can't take the average of a string. It doesn't mean anything. The function mean is looking for numbers, not characters. Okay, so we have to convert a character string into a character string into numbers, and that's what this first video about files is about. See what I said about files, about this file opening being tricky? It's not super straightforward at first blush what to do. Okay, so the first thing I want to do with this is it came as a single string. Well, it's 10 numbers, so I want 10 things. I want it to read things as 10 things. And so the way to do that is with the method dot split lines. So split lines, and I want to split lines every time I see the return character, the \n character, right? So then I do data string. I know it's a string, so I'm gonna call it data underscore string, and fp.read dot split lines. And in the input argument to split lines is, well, where do you want to split? I want to split after every \n, after every new line. There was a \n in that single string that we had. We actually saw it work. It would go to a new line and print out the next number. So I know that there's a \n in there. \n is the escape sequence for new line. So I do that, and then I close, and then I want to print out the data string, and then I want to print out the type of data string. Now the type is no longer, so I run it, Python 3, file1.py, and up it comes here, and you see that it's no longer a string. And the type is no longer a string, it's a list. You see the square brackets there? The square brackets means it's no longer a single thing, it's a group of 10 things. And you can see it's a group of 10 strings. So it's each number followed by the \n, all separated, and so there's 10 elements to this string list, right? Well, now that we have this list of strings, right, 10 different strings, we need a way to convert each of those strings into a number. That's not too hard in Python. There's a way to do that, but there's this little nuance here, is that I want to make a list, an array, if you will, of floating point numbers. Lots of different variables, lots of different lists are immutable in Python. This is a new topic as well, immutable things, which means once you make them, you can't change the values of them, you can't change anything of them. And so that's a little tricky. There are tricks. There are methods to change things, like to add a number to a list, for example. And there are things you can do, but it's very constrained. It takes a method to do everything. So I'm going to make a floating point list, and I'm going to call it data float. And I'm going to make it square brackets with nothing in it. I'm going to make it an empty set, an empty list, right? And then every time I convert one of those strings from data_string to a number, I'm going to append this list I made, this data float list. I'm going to append it with that number. And so I'm just going to grow that list, that floating point list, with the append method on the data set that I have. Okay? So that's this thing we're learning. We're learning about append as well. I need a loop, so I do for I in the range of the size of the data string, 10 in this case. So it's going to do it 10 times. And so I say, I just do data float append, this method associated with this new list called data float. And then the way to convert that string, the ith element of data_string, is to just call it float. Float, then in parentheses, data_string sub I, right? Brackets, square brackets I. Then when I print out float, it's a list of numbers, and then I can actually take the average of those numbers, now that it's a list of 10 numbers, and I can print that average out, and lo and behold, it comes up with the right answer. You can compare that to Excel or something like that to show that you get the right number. Wow, that was a long video. We learned a whole lot of things. We learned about dot and then methods coming after an object in Python. That's important. We learned about the difference between different types of variables, strings versus numbers, right? There's just a lot of things that we covered in here, and it's just the simple task of opening up a file, right? We're going to learn a lot of difficult things early with regard to this file, but once we kind of get a groove on how to open files, it's going to end up being very easy and very ordinary. So it's just going to take a little while, that's all.